Hello, friends, and welcome back to The Snoozy Scientist. Tonight, we drift once more through the quiet wonders of science, letting the mysteries of the natural world wash over us, one sleepy yawn at a time.
We begin tonight with a question that has haunted the edges of our imagination for generations. When we look into the eyes of a chimpanzee, our closest living relative, we catch a spark of something deeply unsettling and profoundly familiar. We see hands that could almost be our own.
It is a kinship that runs incredibly deep. Beneath the skin, hidden within the microscopic spiraling of our cells, we share 98.8% of the exact same DNA.
And yet look at the vast distance between the lives we lead. This sheer contrast has left countless minds wondering, if evolution is the author of our shared story, why didn't the chimpanzee walk the exact same path? If they aren't evolving into us, then what exactly are they becoming?
Tonight, we will follow that question deep into the shadows of ancient forests, through fossils buried in stone, and into the secret codes of life itself. But before we step back in time, if you enjoy drifting off with these slow, soothing science stories without any pressure to stay awake, a like and a subscribe would mean the world.
It helps this quiet corner of the internet grow, guiding others who seek a calm escape to find their way here. Please, let us know in the comments where you are resting tonight and what time it is in your part of the world. We love seeing how far these peaceful explorations travel.
Now take a long, deep breath. Let the tension slip from your shoulders, let your heavy eyes soften, and together let us step quietly into the humid, dappled light of the canopy.
It is so easy to see why people carry the assumption that a chimp should eventually morph into a human. The mind takes a shortcut. We look at their faces, their posture, and we imagine them simply standing a few steps behind us on the exact same road.
It is an image that could be sketched in a child's notebook, time gently nudging the ape forward until it catches up to our own reflection. This simple, comforting picture has been cemented in our minds for over a century by a very famous illustration, the so-called March of Progress.
You know the drawing. You have likely seen it in textbooks or on museum walls. It starts on the left with a small, stooped ape, then a slightly taller, hairy figure shuffling forward. Next comes a cave dweller gripping a primitive tool, until finally on the far right a modern human strides confidently into the future.
The progression seems so logical, so carved in stone. Yet as compelling as that drawing is, it has planted a stubborn myth that refuses to fade. It tricks us into believing that evolution is a ladder.
It suggests that all life is marching single file toward one inevitable goal, if only given enough time. But life never climbs a staircase. Evolution does not have a finish line waiting at the top.
Instead, life breathes and branches outward, much like a magnificent, sprawling tree. Countless twigs and stems push in every conceivable direction. Some branches grow thick and strong, while others remain slender, eventually pruned away by the cold winds of time.
We as humans are not the star sitting at the top of the tree. We are merely one single branch. We are unique, yes, but no more the final destination than the beautiful wild branches that sprouted right beside us.
To imagine chimps as failed humans, just waiting in the wings to shed their fur and build little fires, is to fundamentally misunderstand the forest. They are not waiting to catch up. They have been evolving on their very own path for millions of years, shaped by the pressures of their own world, just as we were shaped by ours.
Think of two rivers born from the same mountain spring. At first they trickle over the same stones, identical and clear, but as they flow down the mountain they diverge. One carves a dramatic valley with roaring waterfalls, while the other winds peacefully through dense, silent woods. Both are real, both are breathtaking.
To ask why the quiet river did not become a waterfall is to miss the beauty of its own journey. And so the question of why chimps aren't becoming us opens the door to a much richer truth. Evolution has no crown. It has only branches, each alive in its own right, each carving its own exquisite shape against the evening sky. Let your mind drift back across the vast, unimaginable ocean of time. We are leaving the modern world behind, leaving the hum of electricity and the glow of screens, traveling deep into the heart of East Africa. We are settling into a world that existed between 5 and 7 million years ago. It is an era bathed in a golden ancient light. The air is thick and warm, carrying the scent of damp earth, crushed leaves, and the distant, heavy promise of rain. For countless ages, this land had been cloaked in an unbroken, emerald sea of dense rainforest. The canopy was a continuous roof of green, a safe and shadowed haven where life climbed, swung, and chattered high above the forest floor. But the earth is a restless sleeper, always shifting, always changing its shape. Around this time, a profound and slow-moving transformation began to sweep across the continent. The global climate began to cool and dry in a slow, imperceptible rhythm. The rains, once reliable and constant, began to falter, falling in new, unpredictable patterns. Because of this, the great unbroken ocean of forest began to retreat. The trees thinned out, leaving gaps in the canopy where the harsh, brilliant sunlight poured through to touch the soil. In these newly opened spaces, a different kind of life took root. Grasses, resilient and golden, began to stretch across the drying earth. The landscape transformed into a vast, sprawling mosaic. Dense, shadowed groves of ancient trees were now separated by wide, sun-drenched plains and wandering rivers. It was a beautiful but unforgiving world. Herds of ancient antelopes grazed peacefully near the shimmering watering holes, their ears flicking at the drone of insects. But the tall grasses also hid terrible dangers. Predators of immense size and silent grace, massive felines with saber teeth, and ancient relatives of the lion, prowled the edges of the woodlands, their golden eyes watching from the shadows. It was right here, in this restless, shifting, and transitional landscape, that our shared ancestor lived. This creature was a magnificent ghost of the deep past. It was neither a chimpanzee nor a human. It was something beautifully caught in between, a bridge composed of flesh and bone, holding the seeds of two entirely different destinies. If we could sit quietly in the tall grass and watch this ancestor move, we would see a creature intimately tied to the rhythm of the trees, yet increasingly drawn to the ground. From this single elusive population of ancient apes, two great lineages would eventually arise. One would weave its way deeper into the forest, eventually leading to the modern chimpanzees. The other would step out into the blinding light of the savanna, embarking on the long, staggering journey that would eventually lead to us. The greatest challenge in understanding this shared ancestor is that time is a thief. This creature did not leave behind a perfectly preserved portrait for us to admire. What we have are mere fragments, broken whispers of bone scattered across millions of years, locked away in the quiet, heavy vaults of stone. Each fossil is a puzzle piece, offering only a tantalizing glimpse of what once breathed and walked beneath the African sun. Among the most famous of these ancient whispers is a fossil known as Sahelanthropus chidensis. It was discovered far from the lush forest, buried deep in the harsh, windswept sands of Chad. To look at the skull of Sahelanthropus is to look at a profound paradox. The skull is small, roughly the size of a coconut, holding a brain volume barely larger than that of a modern chimpanzee. It possesses a heavy, projecting brow ridge and a short, ape-like muzzle. Yet, hidden beneath this skull lies a secret that changed our understanding of history. The opening at the base of the skull, the precise place where the spinal cord connects to the brain, is shifted forward. In apes that walk on all fours, this opening sits toward the back of the head. But in Sahelanthropus, the placement strongly suggests that its head rested gracefully atop a vertical spine. This tiny, subtle shift in bone geometry hints at something monumental, the very beginnings of upright bipedal posture. Some scientists look at this and see the earliest known hominin, the first true step on our specific branch of the tree. Others debate its exact placement in the grand lineage. But what remains undeniably clear is that this creature sat incredibly close to the absolute root of the Great Split. Moving across the continent to the rolling, ancient hills of Kenya, the earth yielded another breathtaking clue. This fossil is named Orrorin tugenensis, affectionately nicknamed the Millennium Man, because it was brought into the light in the year 2000. Orrorin offers us another beautiful, complex glimpse into that uncertain dawn where the forest met the plains. The remnants of Orrorin tell a story of a life lived in two distinct realms. Its fossilized thigh bone boasts a specific shape and structure that strongly suggests it was capable of supporting the body's weight on two legs, at least for part of the time while moving across the ground. It was testing the waters of bipedalism, finding balance in a new way of walking. And yet, its arms and its long, curved finger bones reveal a creature that was still profoundly at home among the leaves. Those curved fingers were perfectly sculpted by natural selection for gripping thick branches and hauling a heavy body up into the safety of the canopy. Orrorin was a true creature of the mosaic, blending the traits of a ground walker and a tree climber into one harmonious existence. Picture the daily rhythm of such a life. As the heavy golden sun peeked over the horizon, painting the morning mist in shades of violet and rose, this ancestor would have slowly roused itself from a woven nest of leaves high up in the protective embrace of a tree. The canopy was its sanctuary, the only place safe from the night-prowling terrors of the ground. With deliberate, practiced grace, it would have climbed down the massive trunks, its curved fingers finding familiar grooves in the bark. Once on the soft, damp forest floor, it would begin the day's foraging. It might have searched for ripe, sugary fruits, dug up starchy roots, or plucked tender young leaves. Perhaps it even picked up a heavy, smooth river stone to crack open hard nuts, or stripped the bark from a slender twig to probe for insects. But life on the ground required a constant, exhausting vigilance. The safety of the trees was always calling. As they ventured further toward the edges of the woodlands, where the trees gave way to the sprawling, sunlit grass, they had to be constantly aware. The tall, swaying grass could easily conceal a predator waiting for an easy, unwary meal. Survival in this transitional zone depended entirely on a quickness of mind, an agility of body, and an acute awareness of the ever-shifting landscape around them. These ancestors were fragile beings. They did not have sharp claws, venomous fangs, or thick armored hides. Yet, their quiet, daily persistence carried forward the vital spark of a lineage that would eventually conquer the globe. They survived by balancing perfectly on the razor's edge between the shadows of the forest and the blinding light of the open plains. When we try to picture this shared origin, we must remember that evolution does not draw in clean, sharp, black and white lines. It does not flip a switch to turn one species into another. Instead, species shade into one another with infinite subtlety, exactly like wet watercolors bleeding and blending on a canvas. What we categorize as Sahelanthropus or Arowan might not be our direct great-great-grandparents. They might be close cousins, representing the many varied, beautiful experiments that nature was running at that exact moment in time. Nature is the ultimate tinkerer. Some of those evolutionary experiments failed, their lineages quietly pruning themselves away into the silent abyss of extinction. But others carried advantageous traits that endured the test of time, passed down through the slow, unbroken chain of countless generations until those traits eventually reached both modern chimpanzees and modern humans. Therefore, our common origin is less about a single heroic figure standing proudly at a crossroads and more about a cluster of beings living in scattered, varied pockets across Africa. Each small population was simply trying to survive, adapting in its own subtle way to the specific challenges of its local valley, its local riverbank, or its local grove of trees. It was within these scattered pockets that the great divergence truly began. The story of our split from chimpanzees was not a sudden divorce. It was a long, slow, and incredibly gradual drifting apart driven by the shifting geography of the Earth itself. As the climate continued to dry and the forests continued to fragment, populations of these shared ancestors found themselves separated. Perhaps a wide, impassable river carved a new path through the land, cutting one group off from another. Perhaps a vast stretch of arid, unforgiving grassland expanded between two shrinking islands of forest. However it happened, once these populations became isolated, they ceased to mix their genes. They found themselves facing entirely different worlds, and the invisible hand of natural selection began to gently, relentlessly sculpt them in opposite directions. Let us look softly at the groups that stayed behind in the shrinking forests. For these creatures, the towering trees remained the absolute center of their universe. The forest provided their food, their shelter, and their only reliable escape from the jaws of predators. In this dense, three-dimensional world, raw physical strength and breathtaking agility were the ultimate currencies of survival. Generation after generation, nature favored those individuals who possessed the longest, strongest arms. It favored those with flexible shoulders capable of rotating wildly as they swung from branch to fragile branch. It favored those with hands that could lock onto a vine with the unyielding strength of an iron vise. Over millions of years, these pressures molded their bodies to absolute perfection for a life suspended in the canopy. These forest dwellers became the proto-chimps. They retained the deep ancestral knowledge of the seasons, the locations of fruiting trees, and the intricate, intimate social bonds required to maintain peace within a tightly knit troop. They did not need to change their body plan drastically, because their environment, though shrinking, remained fundamentally the same. They were masters of the green shadows. But now let us turn our gaze to the other groups, the ones who found themselves pushed to the very edges of the forest, or perhaps left stranded in small groves surrounded by an ever-expanding sea of savanna. For these proto-humans, the old ways of the forest were no longer enough to guarantee tomorrow. The open plains were a radically different, terrifying test of endurance. Out on the savanna, there was no thick canopy to hide in. The horizon stretched endlessly, broken only by a few scattered, thorny acacia trees. The sun beat down without the mercy of shade. And most importantly, the predators had a clear, unobstructed view of the land. In this exposed world, a new strategy was desperately needed. Here, in the tall, golden grasses, the simple ability to glance upward, to rise up on two legs and peer over the swaying stalks, granted a massive advantage. Those who could comfortably stand tall could spot a stalking feline from a distance. They could see the dark, gathering clouds of a distant rainstorm, or spot the lush green outline of a faraway watering hole. Standing upright did more than just expand their vision. It initiated a cascade of anatomical miracles. By committing to balancing on their hind legs, These early proto-humans completely freed their hands from the burden of locomotion. Hands that no longer needed to walk or climb were now free to carry. They could carry armfuls of scavenged roots and fruits back to a safe location to share with their mates and children. They could carry heavy sticks or unshaped stones, holding them ready to throw at a predator to frighten it away. The freedom of the hands was the quiet, unassuming spark that would eventually ignite the fires of human technology and culture. The difference between the damp, shadowed forest and the dry, windy plain might seem like a simple change of scenery, but over the vast, unfathomable stretches of deep time, it carved a canyon between these two lineages. In the forest, nature rewarded explosive bursts of muscular power. On the boundless plains, nature rewarded something entirely different: stamina and endurance. Walking long distances across the baked earth to find scattered sources of food and water required a body perfectly balanced for efficient, continuous travel. Slowly, over millions of births and deaths, the architecture of the proto-human body transformed. The pelvis widened and tilted, acting as a bowl to support the internal organs. The spine curved inward at the lower back, creating a shock-absorbing spring. The joints of the knees and hips aligned, locking into place to support a vertical stride. The air they breathed, the tough plants they chewed, the predators they evaded, every single element of their environment left a permanent microscopic mark on their biology. The slow, patient chisels of time and environment chipped away at their ancestral forms until the agile, powerful creatures of the forest and the tall, striding creatures of the grassland no longer looked like siblings. They hardly even looked like cousins. It is so vital to picture this not as an abrupt, dramatic event, but as a slow, quiet drifting apart, much like two tectonic plates pulling away from one another at the bottom of the sea. Small differences, completely unnoticeable in a single lifetime, compounded over millions of years. The proto-chimps carried the legacy of the ancient canopy forward, their bodies a testament to the power and grace required to conquer gravity. The proto-humans carried forward the legacy of the open sky, their bodies a testament to the endurance required to walk across the face of the earth. This is the true story of the Great Split. It is a story written not in words, but in the shifting shapes of bones, the stretching of muscles, and the slow rewiring of behaviors. From a single shared root, two magnificent branches reached toward the heavens. One stretched upward, disappearing into the lush green embrace of the jungle canopy. The other strode outward, stepping boldly into the wide, merciless, and sun-drenched plains of Africa. And from that ancient moment of divergence onward, their stories would never truly converge again. To truly understand how these two magnificent branches of the tree of life grew so far apart, we must look deeper than the fossilized bones scattered across the African plains. We must sink beneath the skin, beneath the muscle and the blood, down into the microscopic, silent universe within our very cells. Here, folded into the dark nucleus of almost every cell in your body, lies the ultimate blueprint of life. It is a molecular script, a twisting, spiraling ladder woven from just 4 simple letters, repeating in billions of endless, beautiful combinations. This is DNA. It is the quiet architect of everything you are. When scientists first laid the genetic code of a human side by side with the genetic code of a chimpanzee, the revelation was breathless. The similarities are so profound they almost defy imagination. Nearly 99% of the script is absolutely identical. If you were to read 1,000 letters of a chimpanzee's genetic code, you would find that only about 12 of those letters differ from your own. It is a breathtaking closeness. It tricks the mind into assuming that we are practically the same creature, separated only by a thin, invisible veil. But evolution is a master of subtlety. The vast divergence between our lives and the lives of the chimps does not lie in the bulk of the code, but in the incredibly precise, delicate editing of the script. It is not about having entirely different genes. It is about how those genes are switched on, how they are silenced, and how their timing is orchestrated in the dark warmth of the womb. A tiny shift in the molecular timing can change the shape of a skull, the length of a limb, or the wiring of a mind. Take, for instance, a specific, unassuming stretch of code known as the FOXP2 gene. This tiny sequence acts as a master conductor for the neural circuits that govern complex, rapid muscle movements in the mouth, the jaw, and the larynx. Chimpanzees possess this gene, but their version differs from ours by a mere microscopic fraction. Yet in humans, those minuscule shifts in the code unlocked something miraculous. They granted us the fine, astonishing motor control required to produce articulate speech. Without that tiny edit in the FOXP2 gene, the flowing rivers of sound that we call language would never have existed. The complex grammar, the whispered secrets in the dark, the laws of nations, and the lullabies sung to children. All of it traces back to a subtle molecular twist that separated our vocal destiny from the hoots and calls of the forest canopy. Then there is another silent architect, a small region of DNA known as YAR1, or Human Accelerated Region 1. Unlike genes that build proteins, HAR1 serves as a guide, a mapmaker that directs the intricate wiring of the brain during its earliest, most fragile stages of development. In chimpanzees, this region of code is remarkably stable, having barely changed over millions of years. But in the human lineage, HAR1 underwent a sudden, rapid transformation. This genetic edit is intimately linked to the dramatic folding of our cerebral cortex. The outer layer of the human brain does not simply grow larger. It buckles, folds, and wrinkles into deep valleys and high ridges. This brilliant architectural trick allows the body to pack an astronomically higher number of neurons into the confined, dark space of the skull. It is within these deep, folded valleys that abstract thought, future planning, and complex reasoning were born. The changes did not stop there. Hundreds of other tiny molecular edits rippled through our bodies over the eons. Some quietly adjusted the tilt of the pelvis, altering the mechanics of our walk. Others tweaked the immune system, arming us against new diseases hiding in the open savanna. Still others modified our metabolism, allowing our bodies to extract more energy from the food we gathered. Each change was merely a single notch in a grand biological key, but together they unlocked a completely new way of existing on the Earth. As these genetic edits took hold, they began to physically reshape the architecture of the mind. If you were to hold the brain of an adult chimpanzee in one hand and the brain of a human in the other, the most immediate striking difference would be their sheer weight and volume. The chimp's brain weighs roughly 400 grams, about the size and heft of a large grapefruit. The human brain weighs more than 3 times that amount. But to measure a mind by size alone is to miss the poetry of its design. The human brain is not merely a larger grapefruit, it is entirely reorganized. The most profound expansion occurred just behind the forehead, in a region called the prefrontal cortex. In humans, this area has swelled to magnificent proportions. It is the command center for imagination. It is the place where we close our eyes and vividly picture a tomorrow that does not yet exist. It is where we weigh consequences, suppress impulses, and weave complex social strategies that span decades. For the chimpanzee, the prefrontal cortex is much smaller, keeping them profoundly anchored in the immediate, vibrant present. Yet, to look at a chimp's smaller brain and see it as inferior is a terrible mistake. Their minds are exquisite instruments, flawlessly tuned by natural selection to master the exact challenges of their leafy world. In fact, in certain realms of cognition, the chimpanzee mind effortlessly outpaces our own. Consider their short-term working memory. Scientists once sat young chimps in front of touchscreen computers, flashing a scattered sequence of numbers across the screen for just a fraction of a second before hiding them under blank white squares. The chimps had to tap the squares in the exact numerical order from memory. Human volunteers, even the most focused adults, stumbled and struggled, their minds unable to hold the rapid visual map. The chimpanzees, however, executed the task with lightning-fast, flawless precision. Their eyes absorbed the numbers, and their hands moved in a blur of accuracy. This is not a parlor trick. It is a vital survival mechanism. In the chaotic, three-dimensional maze of the jungle, the ability to instantly memorize the exact location of a predator, a ripe fruit branch, or a rival's sudden movement is the difference between life and death. They carry a living, high-definition map of their world in their minds. Yet the vast, folded landscape of the human brain came with a heavy, unyielding price tag. Brain tissue is incredibly greedy. It is the most energy-hungry substance in the entire body. Our brains consume roughly 1/5 of every single calorie we eat, silently burning energy just to keep the lights of consciousness on. Chimpanzees, with their smaller, more efficient brains, divert that precious energy elsewhere. They channel their calories into the thick, dense muscle fibers of their shoulders, arms, and chest. Pound for pound, a chimpanzee can deliver a physical force nearly twice as powerful as a human. We traded the brute, raw strength of the wild for the expensive, invisible power of thought. We invested in the future, while they perfected the physical reality of the present. The divergence of the mind inevitably poured down into the body, culminating in the magnificent engineering of the hands. To look closely at the hand of a chimpanzee is to see a masterpiece of arboreal design. The palm is broad and heavily muscled. The fingers are exceptionally long and naturally curved like hooks, and the thumb is relatively short and sits low on the wrist. This specific architecture grants them a grip of terrifying, unyielding strength. A chimp can effortlessly hook its fingers over a high branch and suspend its entire body weight with just one hand, barely flexing a muscle. The tendons in their forearms pull the fingers shut like thick steel cables. When moving through the canopy 70 feet above the unforgiving ground, a weak grip is a fatal flaw. Evolution prioritized raw, crushing power over everything else. Their hands are hammers and hooks, built to strip tough bark, snap thick branches, and hold fast to life itself. Now look at your own hand. Spread your fingers and study the proportions. Our hands are much smaller, more delicate. The fingers are straight and shorter, but the true masterpiece of human anatomy is the thumb. Our thumb is long, incredibly muscular at its base and highly mobile. It can easily sweep across the palm to meet the fleshy pad of every single finger perfectly. This simple, elegant alignment is known as the precision grip. It is a biological miracle. It allows us to hold a tiny, fragile object, a seed, a needle, a flake of sharp stone, between the pads of our digits without crushing it. Beneath the skin of your hand lies an incredibly dense, intricate web of nerves, tendons, and muscles, all communicating in a constant, rapid feedback loop with the massive motor cortex of your brain. The chimpanzee can crush a tough nut with a rock using broad, forceful strokes, but the human hand, armed with the precision grip, could hold a piece of flint at the exact perfect angle, striking it with just enough calculated force to chip away a razor-sharp blade. Out of this delicate grip came the mastery of fire, as fingers learned to spin wooden drills. Out of it came clothing, as bone needles were pushed through animal hides. Out of it came the delicate carving of flutes, the writing of symphonies, and the turning of microscopic screws that would eventually send metal machines to the stars. Our hands were liberated from the heavy, exhausting labor of climbing and walking. And that liberation brings us to perhaps the most defining physical transformation of all, the choice to stand up and walk forever on two legs. Bipedalism is so natural to us now that we rarely consider how bizarre and complex it truly is. To balance a heavy torso, a massive head, and swinging arms on two narrow pillars of bone is an astonishing feat of biological engineering. When our ancestors committed to the open plains, the entire architecture of the body had to be violently, beautifully redesigned. The human foot lost the grasping, ape-like big toe, transforming instead into a stiff, propulsive lever with a shock-absorbing arch. Our legs grew long and straight, our knee joints locking gracefully to bear weight without constant muscular effort. The pelvis, once a long blade in apes, widened and shortened into a deep basin to hold our internal organs upright against the constant downward pull of gravity. But the most magical advantage of this new posture was endurance. A chimpanzee can easily outsprint a human over a very short distance, running on all fours, but they tire quickly. Their bodies are not built to shed heat or maintain prolonged momentum. The human body, however, became the ultimate endurance machine. With our upright posture, only the tops of our heads and shoulders were exposed to the brutal midday sun, while the rest of our body caught the cooling breezes flowing across the savanna. Paired with millions of tiny sweat glands covering our bare skin, early humans could run for hours without overheating. We became persistence hunters. We could lock our eyes on a swift antelope and simply jog after it. We didn't need to be faster, we only needed to never ever stop. We tracked our prey across the blistering plains until the animal simply collapsed from heat exhaustion. Our strange, upright bodies allowed us to conquer distances that would have been impossible for any ape. But evolution never gives a gift without demanding a toll, and the cost of walking upright was steep and painful. The reshaping of the pelvis that gave us our beautiful, efficient stride simultaneously narrowed the bony ring of the birth canal. At the exact same time in our evolutionary history, our brains, and therefore the skulls of our infants, were rapidly expanding. These two evolutionary forces collided with terrifying results. Childbirth in the human lineage became an incredibly dangerous, agonizing ordeal. For a chimpanzee, giving birth is a relatively solitary, straightforward process. The infant's head passes easily through the wide pelvis. But for humans, the infant must twist and turn through a narrow, rigid maze of bone. This biological bottleneck meant that human mothers could no longer safely give birth alone. They required the physical assistance and emotional comfort of others. In a strange, poetic way, the agony and danger of childbirth may have forced our ancestors to weave even tighter social bonds, cementing the deep empathy and cooperation that would become the hallmark of our species. Furthermore, we surrendered our safety. We lost the explosive muscular power that allowed our cousins to vanish into the high branches at the first snap of a predator's twig. We became tethered to the ground, soft and vulnerable, relying entirely on our wits, our tools, and our sheer numbers to survive the terrors of the night. To observe a chimpanzee knuckle-walking through the dappled light of the jungle is to look at the majestic path we left behind. Their bodies are a testament to raw stability, immense power, and the vertical freedom of the forest. To watch a human walk across an open field is to see the physical embodiment of endurance, a creature built to carry the weight of an enormous mind across the endless horizons of the earth. Long before the first stones were stacked to build cities, long before seeds were deliberately sown into the earth, and long before the first symbols were scratched onto clay tablets, there was a different kind of spark. It was a spark that did not just illuminate the deep African night, but one that fundamentally rewired the biology of our ancestors. We are speaking, of course, of fire.
For millions of years, the daily rhythm of every primate on Earth was dictated by the unrelenting demands of the stomach. In the lush-shadowed canopy, a chimpanzee must dedicate a massive portion of its waking life simply to chewing. They can spend up to 6 grueling hours every single day mechanically grinding down tough, fibrous leaves, thick stems, and bitter, unripe fruits.
The digestive system of a chimpanzee is a massive, heavy, and incredibly complex biological engine. It requires a long, winding intestinal tract to slowly ferment and break down raw plant matter, extracting whatever calories are locked tightly inside the rigid cell walls. This immense gut is a necessity for survival in the forest, but it is also an anchor. It demands a vast amount of the body's daily energy just to keep running.
Because the gut is so energy-hungry, it enforces a strict biological ceiling on the rest of the body. There is simply not enough surplus energy left over to fund the growth of another massive energy-demanding organ. For the chimpanzee, the raw diet guarantees their survival in the jungle, but it forever limits the size and complexity of their brain.
But somewhere in the deep, hazy past, perhaps more than 1,000,000 years ago, a profound shift occurred on the open savanna. Small, vulnerable bands of early humans did something no other creature had ever dared to do. They stopped fleeing from the flames sparked by lightning strikes, and instead, they captured them. They fed the embers, coaxed them into roaring campfires, and eventually they began to drop their gathered food into the glowing coals.
The act of cooking was not merely a change in taste, it was an evolutionary revolution. Fire acts as an external stomach. The intense heat violently breaks down the tough chemical bonds in fibrous roots and dense tubers. It melts the collagen in scavenged meat, rendering it soft and easily chewable. It kills dangerous parasites and hidden bacteria, making the food exponentially safer to consume.
Most importantly, cooking unlocked a hidden vault of calories. A tough, raw tuber that would have taken an early human hours of exhausting chewing could be roasted in the embers until it was soft, sweet, and peeling apart in delicate strands. Suddenly, a massive surge of easily digestible energy was rushing into their bodies, acquired in a fraction of the time and with a fraction of the physical effort.
With the burden of digestion outsourced to the flames, a magnificent biological trade-off took place. Over thousands of generations, the human intestinal tract began to shrink. We no longer needed the massive, heavy fermentation vats of our ape cousins. Our bellies grew smaller and flatter, and the vast surplus of energy that was suddenly freed up had to go somewhere.
That energy traveled upward. It flooded the skull. The shrinking of the human gut paid the incredibly expensive biological tax required to fund a rapidly expanding brain. Without the daily crackling fires roasting roots and searing meat, the modern human mind simply could not exist. We traded our large intestines for our large cerebral cortex. We literally cooked our way to higher intelligence.
But fire did something else, something equally profound that reached far beyond the boundaries of anatomy. When the sun dipped below the horizon on the ancient savanna, the world became a terrifying place of absolute darkness and prowling predators. For a chimpanzee, nightfall is the cue to climb high into the trees, build a silent nest of leaves, and sleep safely hidden away.
For our ancestors, however, the fire pushed the darkness back. It created a warm, glowing circle of safety on the perilous ground. And within that ring of light, the length of the day was artificially extended. They did not have to go to sleep when the sun vanished. They sat together, shoulder to shoulder, staring into the mesmerizing, dancing flames. And in that extended, firelit twilight, something new began to stir in the folds of their expanding brains.
The sparks of thought nourished by the cooked food needed a way to leap from one isolated mind to another. The answer was language. Now it is important to understand that chimpanzees are intensely communicative creatures. The forest echoes with their voices. They hoot, they scream, they bark, and they pant. They use a rich, subtle vocabulary of facial expressions, touches, and aggressive postures to signal danger, submission, or desire.
Scientists working with captive chimps have even taught them to use symbolic keyboards and sign language. Some exceptional individuals have memorized hundreds of distinct signs. They can clearly ask for a piece of fruit, request to be tickled, or signal that they are angry. But there is an invisible, impenetrable wall in their communication. A chimpanzee can sign the word for apple and the word for give, but they do not possess the neural architecture to invent grammar.
Their communication is fundamentally tethered to the immediate physical present. A chimp cannot weave sounds together to tell a companion about an apple they ate 3 days ago. Nor can they express their hope of finding an apple tomorrow. They cannot describe a predator they have never seen. Their signs are bursts of current emotion and immediate need, not a flowing river of narrative.
Humans, sitting around those ancient fires, stepped through a cognitive portal into an entirely new realm of existence. As our brains expanded, incredibly specialized regions developed. Broca's area coordinated the complex microscopic muscle movements of the lips, tongue, and vocal cords, while Wernicke's area focused on decoding syntax and meaning. Together, they allowed our ancestors to not just label the world, but to arrange those labels into complex, structured sentences.
This development granted us a superpower known as displaced reference. Suddenly, knowledge was no longer trapped in the moment. One hunter could sit by the fire and perfectly describe the exact location of a hidden watering hole a 3 days' walk away, painting a map in the minds of others who had never been there. A mother could warn her child about the specific hunting habits of a leopard, teaching survival without exposing the child to danger.
But language went even further than practical survival. It allowed us to share imagination. It birthed the ability to discuss things that did not physically exist at all. Around the flickering flames, the first myths were spoken aloud. Stories of ancestors who lived in the stars, tales of forest spirits, and the invention of unwritten laws that governed how the group should behave.
These shared stories became the invisible glue of human survival. In the chimpanzee world, a society is strictly limited by the physical act of grooming. To build trust, a chimp must sit and meticulously pick through the fur of another individual for hours. It is an intimate, calming ritual that solidifies alliances, but it is incredibly time-consuming. Because of the sheer hours required to maintain these physical bonds, a chimpanzee troop naturally fractures and splits when it grows beyond a few dozen members.
Human language became a form of vocal grooming. Instead of physically touching one person at a time, an early human could sit by the fire and tell a captivating story, emotionally bonding with 30 people simultaneously. Words replaced the picking of fur. Shared laughter, synchronized singing, and mutual outrage at a toll defense allowed human groups to scale up massively.
Through the magic of shared belief, humans could coordinate with strangers. If two chimps from different troops meet in the forest, the result is almost always violent conflict. They have no physical history of grooming to establish trust. But if two ancient humans from different bands met and both wore the same painted symbol of a hawk, or both spoke the same myth of a river god, they could instantly recognize each other as part of a larger, imagined tribe.
This capacity to cooperate flexibly in massive numbers is the true secret of human dominance. We could organize hunts involving hundreds of beaters and trappers. We could divide labor, allowing some to specialize in knapping flawless stone tools while others gathered medicinal herbs. We wove webs of culture that stretched across entire continents, all bound together by the fragile, invisible thread of spoken breath.
Yet to sustain this incredibly complex world of language, fire, and sprawling cultural myths, our species had to make one of the most perilous evolutionary gambles in the history of mammals. We had to drastically alter the fundamental timeline of our own lives. We had to invent the prolonged human childhood.
In the dense, dangerous world of the chimpanzee, an infant must grow up quickly. For the first few months, it clings desperately to the hair on its mother's chest, absolutely dependent on her body for warmth, food, and transport. But the clock is ticking. The forest does not forgive weakness. By the time a chimp is 4 or 5 years old, it is already largely independent, navigating the treacherous canopy, foraging for its own food, and defending itself in the complex social hierarchy of the troop.
Their brains mature rapidly, hardening into the rigid, instinctual patterns required for immediate survival. A chimp simply does not have the luxury of spending a decade making mistakes. If they do not quickly master the mechanics of their environment, they will die. Their childhood is a brief, intense sprint toward self-sufficiency.
Human childhood, by stark contrast, is a breathtakingly long, incredibly vulnerable marathon. A human 5-year-old left alone on the savannah would perish in a matter of hours. Our young remain deeply, hopelessly dependent on adults for food, shelter, and protection for well over a decade. Even into their late teenage years, the human brain is still actively developing, pruning synapses, and laying down the thick myelin sheaths that speed up complex thought.
On the surface, this extended period of helplessness seems like a terrible evolutionary flaw. A mother carrying a dependent, slow-growing child cannot forage as efficiently. The group must expend massive amounts of hard-won calories to feed children who cannot yet contribute. An entire village must wrap a protective shield around its young for 15 years just to ensure the next generation survives.
But beneath this heavy burden lies our greatest evolutionary triumph. By delaying physical and mental maturity, evolution gifted the human brain with the most precious resource of all, time. Time for the neurons to remain soft, plastic, and highly adaptable. Time to soak up the massive, overwhelming ocean of culture, language, and technology that our ancestors had accumulated.
A chimpanzee only needs to learn how to be a chimpanzee. A human child must learn how to speak a language with tens of thousands of words. They must learn the intricate social rules of their specific tribe, the myths that bind them, the correct way to strike a flint to create a spark, the precise seasons for harvesting hidden tubers, and the complex rituals of sharing meat. All of this knowledge is far too vast to be encoded into DNA. It must be downloaded over years of patient observation, from the minds of the elders into the minds of the young.
And nature provided the perfect mechanism for this downloading process: play. What looks like children simply running, wrestling, and pretending is actually an intense evolutionary classroom. When human children play make-believe, they are simulating the complex social dynamics of adulthood. They are testing the boundaries of empathy, practicing the negotiation of rules, and experimenting with hypothetical scenarios in a safe, protected environment.
The long childhood created a temporal runway for the human mind to take flight. It allowed each generation to absorb the entirety of the previous generation's wisdom, and then, crucially, to add their own tiny innovations to the pile. A child who spends 10 years watching their parents tend a fire might one day realize that arranging the stones differently makes the fire burn hotter. That child's innovation is then passed to the next generation, where it is refined again.
This is the engine of cumulative culture. It is the reason we did not remain stagnant. The chimpanzee's rapid maturation locks them into a beautiful static harmony with the forest. But our agonizingly slow maturation unlocked the endless compounding potential of the human mind. The helplessness of our infants is the exact price we paid for the mastery of the world.
We are in essence the ape that never quite grows up. We retain our curiosity, our neuroplasticity, and our deep need for play long into our adult lives. From the glowing embers of the first controlled fires, to the intricate syntax of our spoken myths, to the long sheltered years of our youth, our path was carved by a unique synergy of forces. We built a world where biology and culture became inextricably intertwined, propelling us far away from the quiet, rhythmic lives of our cousins in the canopy.
As we follow this long, winding road toward the modern mind, it is incredibly tempting to look back and imagine that we were always walking alone. We tend to view our lineage as a solitary traveler, a single chosen species moving steadily toward the light of civilization, leaving the chimpanzees far behind in the shadows of the ancient canopy. But the tree of life is much more tangled, much more lush, and far more complex than our simple myths of solitude would suggest. For the vast majority of our history on this planet, we were not the only humans walking the earth. There were others. If we look closely at the branching tree of our ancestry, we find that we had parallel cousins, born from the very same deep roots, who walked out into the world and carved completely different destinies from the stone and ice of the deep past. Among the closest and most captivating of these lost cousins were the Neanderthals. They were not our direct ancestors, as old textbooks once mistakenly claimed. They were our evolutionary siblings, a parallel branch that flourished in a world of breathtaking cold. More than 400,000 years ago, long before our own specific species had even begun to leave the warm embrace of the African continent, the Neanderthals were already the undisputed masters of Europe and Western Asia. They lived through a succession of brutal ice ages that scarred the landscape, carving deep, freezing valleys and locking the oceans into monumental creeping glaciers. The environment they faced was a relentless, frozen frontier, and their bodies were magnificently sculpted by natural selection to endure it. Where our bodies are relatively slender, built for shedding heat under a relentless sun, the Neanderthal body was a masterpiece of cold weather survival. They were stocky, with broad chests, thick waists, and shorter limbs, proportions perfectly designed to conserve precious body heat in a bitterly freezing climate. Beneath their skin lay bones of astonishing thickness, anchoring muscles of immense, terrifying power. Their arms and hands were built for a world of heavy, forceful labor, capable of gripping a thick wooden spear or a heavy stone scraper with a strength that would easily overpower the strongest modern athlete. Yet the image of the Neanderthal as a mindless grunting brute wrapped in crude animal skins is a profound injustice to their memory. They were deeply emotionally complex beings. They were masters of fire, using it not just for warmth, but to transform their environment. They crafted beautiful, highly specialized stone tools. They ventured into the deep, terrifying darkness of caves to paint symbols on the walls. They wore ornaments crafted from shells and the talons of eagles. And perhaps most movingly, they buried their dead, sometimes leaving traces of pollen that suggest flowers were placed deliberately into the graves. They possessed a depth of feeling and an awareness of mortality that we so often and so arrogantly claim as uniquely our own. And they were not the only ones sharing the world. Further east, hidden in the freezing, remote caves of Siberia and the breathtaking, oxygen-starved highlands of Tibet, lived another ghost lineage, the Denisovans. For decades, we had absolutely no idea they had ever existed. Their presence was revealed to us only a little over a decade ago, not through the discovery of complete dramatic skeletons, but through the tiniest fragments of bone, a single child's tooth, a shattered piece of a pinky finger, preserved in the frozen earth. From these tiny fragments, scientists extracted DNA, and that molecular script revealed an entire sprawling population of humans that had adapted to some of the most extreme environments on the planet. The Denisovans were close kin to the Neanderthals, but they carried their own unique genetic gifts. Hidden within their DNA was the biological secret to thriving at extreme altitudes, a genetic adaptation that allowed their blood to effortlessly capture scarce oxygen from the thin, freezing mountain air. For hundreds of thousands of years, these magnificent cousins thrived. They hunted massive, dangerous game. They sat around their own flickering fires, they raised their children, and they looked up at the exact same stars we see today. And yet, if you look around our world now, you will not find a single living Neanderthal or Denisovan. Around 40,000 years ago, their populations began to thin, fragment, and quietly fade into the mists of prehistory. The reasons for their disappearance remain one of the most haunting mysteries of our shared past. It was likely a tangled, unfortunate convergence of tragedies. The climate was violently shifting once again, transforming the landscapes they relied upon. Diseases may have swept through their relatively small, isolated populations. And inevitably, there was the arrival of our own species, Homo sapiens, pushing into their territories, hunting the same game, and foraging the same plants. Why did we survive the great bottleneck of time while they vanished? The answer likely lies in the invisible architecture of our societies. Neanderthals lived in small, tightly knit but isolated groups. When a harsh winter or a sudden famine struck a local valley, a Neanderthal family had to face it alone. But our species, armed with the complex, flowing language we explored earlier, had woven vast social networks. We traded tools, shells, and knowledge across hundreds of miles. If one group faced starvation, they could rely on the alliances they had forged with distant neighbors. Our survival was not secured by being physically stronger, but by being infinitely more connected. Yet to say they went entirely extinct is not strictly true. When our ancestors met these parallel cousins in the cold landscapes of Eurasia, they did not only compete. They recognized each other, they lived together, and they had children together. Today, if you carry ancestry from outside of sub-Saharan Africa, you carry a small living percentage of Neanderthal DNA in the very cells of your body. If your ancestors hail from parts of Asia or Oceania, you carry the genetic echoes of the Denisovans. They did not simply vanish, they delved into us. We are a mosaic of survivors. As we marvel at our survival, at our sprawling global networks, and at the astonishing capabilities of our brains and bodies, we must confront a sobering reality. Evolution is not a benevolent force that grants gifts without a price. It is a blind, pragmatic tinkerer. Every single advantage that set us apart from the chimpanzees, and every trait that allowed us to outlast our extinct cousins, was purchased at a terrible, agonizing biological cost. Our bodies are essentially museums of evolutionary compromises, covered in invisible scars. Consider for a moment the simple act of standing up. When we rose from the forest floor to walk exclusively on two legs, we liberated our hands to hold tools, fire, and eventually the pen. But to achieve this, the entire architecture of the mammalian spine had to be violently repurposed. For a creature walking on all fours, like a chimpanzee or a dog, the spine acts like a horizontal suspension bridge, beautifully supported at both ends by the limbs. The internal organs hang comfortably below it. But when we stood upright, we took that horizontal bridge and flipped it vertically, turning it into a weight-bearing pillar. Evolution had to introduce a series of sharp S-shaped curves into the lower back just to keep our heavy torso balanced over our hips. This is a precarious, inherently flawed design. It places an immense, unrelenting downward pressure on the fragile discs of cartilage sitting between the vertebrae. This is why, as we age, so many of us are plagued by slipped discs, pinched nerves, sciatica, and the dull chronic ache of lower back pain. We are walking around in a body whose foundational support structure is constantly fighting a losing battle against gravity. When your back aches after a long day of standing, you are feeling the direct, painful echo of an evolutionary choice made millions of years ago on the African savanna. A chimpanzee, resting comfortably on its knuckles, rarely experiences this structural agony. The toll of our bipedal journey extends downward into our lower joints. Our knees, our hips, and our fragile ankles must absorb the violent, repetitive shock of our entire body weight with every single step we take. where our primate cousins distribute their weight harmoniously across 4 limbs as they move through the canopy, we pound the earth with just 2. The cartilage wears away, the ligaments fray, and the bones grind together. The widespread prevalence of osteoarthritis in humans is the heavy tax we pay for the privilege of endurance running and crossing continents on foot. But perhaps the most profound and dangerous compromise of our evolutionary history occurred within the pelvis. As we explored before, the biomechanics of walking upright demanded that the human pelvis become narrow, bowl-shaped, and rigid to anchor the leg muscles efficiently. But at the exact same evolutionary moment, the discovery of fire and cooking was flooding our bodies with surplus energy, fueling an unprecedented, explosive expansion of the brain. These two forces, the narrowing of the hips for walking and the swelling skull for thinking, were on a catastrophic collision course. The result is what anthropologists call the obstetric dilemma. Human childbirth became a harrowing, life-threatening ordeal, unmatched in its danger across the entire animal kingdom. The infant's massive head must undergo an agonizing series of twists and turns to navigate a birth canal that is barely wide enough to accommodate it. For millions of years before the advent of modern medicine, childbirth was one of the leading causes of mortality for both mothers and infants. The intelligence that allowed us to invent language, art, and civilization demanded that our very first moments in the world be fought on the razor's edge between life and death. The chimpanzee, whose brain remained small and whose pelvis remained wide, does not face this agonizing biological bottleneck. Their entry into the world is quiet and swift. Even the magnificent brain itself, the crown jewel of our evolutionary journey, carries a hidden, terrifying vulnerability. The human brain is a marvel of densely packed neurons, intricate synapses, and vast, folding networks of memory and imagination. But maintaining this immense, complex circuitry requires a staggering amount of biological upkeep. As our lifespans have artificially extended far beyond the years our ancestors lived, we have discovered the tragic fragility of our own minds. Because the human brain is so hyperconnected, when the cellular maintenance begins to fail, the unraveling is devastating. Conditions like Alzheimer's disease and other forms of progressive dementia are tragically common in humans, yet they are almost entirely unheard of in chimpanzees in the wild. The slow, heartbreaking erasure of memory, the loss of self, and the fraying of the cognitive web are the dark shadows cast by our immense intelligence. We built a machine so complex that it inevitably begins to short-circuit when left running for too long. The compromises extend even to the structure of our faces. As our brains swelled, expanding outward and upward, the shape of the human skull had to be completely remodeled. Our faces became flatter, pulled inward beneath the heavy, bulging forehead. Consequently, the human jaw shrank dramatically. But evolution is often a sloppy architect. While our jaws grew smaller, the genetic code dictating the number of our teeth remained exactly the same. Because of this mismatch, modern humans simply do not have enough physical real estate in their mouths to comfortably house their final set of molars. This is the origin of the painful, impacted wisdom teeth that so many of us must have surgically removed. A chimpanzee with its long projecting muzzle and massive, powerful jaw has plenty of room for all its teeth. They can effortlessly grind down tough, fibrous plants without ever experiencing the agonizing swelling of an impacted molar. We traded the powerful bite of the wild for the flat, expressive face of a storyteller, and we suffer the dental consequences. Finally, we must look at the invisible shield that keeps us alive, the immune system. When our ancestors began to use language to forge massive tribes, and later when they invented agriculture to build densely packed, sprawling cities, they inadvertently created a paradise for pathogens. Living in close quarters with thousands of other humans surrounded by domesticated animals and their waste exposed us to an unprecedented, endless wave of new bacteria and viruses. To survive this microscopic onslaught, the human immune system had to become incredibly aggressive, hypervigilant, and fiercely reactive. It learned to fight off plagues that would have easily wiped out smaller, isolated populations of primates. But a hypervigilant defense system is inherently dangerous. It is prone to misidentifying targets. This evolutionary hyperactivity is thought to be the root of the widespread autoimmune disorders that plague modern humans, where the body's own defenses turn inward, attacking healthy tissue, joints, and organs. To observe a chimpanzee moving through the deep, humid forest is to see a creature that avoided these specific, heavy burdens. Because they stayed within the biological niche they had occupied for millions of years, their bodies remained in a beautiful, ancient harmony with their environment. Their spines do not ache from bearing the weight of a vertical world. Their mothers do not face the terrifying gauntlet of a narrow birth canal. Their minds, focused on the immediate survival of the present, do not slowly unravel in the fog of dementia. Evolution gives absolutely nothing away for free. Every leap forward is tethered to a weight. To gain the brilliant burning spark of complex thought, to achieve the miraculous endurance required to cross frozen continents and scorching deserts, and to harness the imagination necessary to build sprawling civilizations out of stone and steel, we accepted a litany of physical and mental vulnerabilities that no other primate on Earth has ever had to bear. The aching joints, the fragile minds, the difficult births, and the impacted teeth are not mere biological glitches. They are the scars of our humanity. They are the permanent, undeniable receipts of the evolutionary transactions that allowed us to step out of the shadows of the canopy and into the vast, open light of the world. And as we carry these scars forward, the story naturally flows into the realization that this process is not over. The chisel of evolution has not been set down, not for us, and not for the cousins who remained in the trees. When we gaze upon a chimpanzee resting quietly in the dappled golden light of the forest canopy, it is incredibly tempting to view them as a living fossil. We imagine that they have been frozen in time, perfectly preserved in the amber of prehistory since the days when our shared ancestors first climbed among the ancient leaves. We picture them waiting patiently, static and unchanging, while we raced headlong toward the future. But this picture is a profound illusion. Chimpanzees are not relics of a forgotten past. They are dynamic, vibrant creatures, adapting to the relentless pressures of their world every single day. Their evolution did not abruptly stop when our lineage branched away. It has been quietly, steadily unfolding in the deep green of the African rainforests, written into every heartbeat, every hunt, and every new generation born into an ever-shifting environment. The evidence of this ongoing journey is hidden deep within their biology, far beyond what the naked eye can see. One of the clearest windows into their continuing evolution lies within their immune systems. Life in the dense equatorial forests surrounds chimpanzees with a microscopic universe of parasites, viruses, and bacteria that never leaves them untouched. Over millions of years, their bodies have engaged in a silent, invisible arms race with these pathogens, developing unique genetic defenses to resist infection. For example, if we look closely at their genome, we find variations in the genes that regulate immunity to malaria, a disease that has relentlessly pressed against both humans and chimpanzees for thousands of years. While our human ancestors evolved specific mutations to endure the parasite in the open savannas, chimpanzees followed an entirely different genetic path. They adapted in ways highly specific to the humid shadows of their own environment. These microscopic differences prove that they are not standing still. Their cells are actively learning, fighting, and evolving. Their behavior, too, carries the unmistakable, vibrant imprint of a species in motion. Not every chimpanzee group acts the exact same way. In some specific forests, they have learned to select heavy stones to crack open tough nuts, passing the skill down through generations. In other regions, they completely ignore stones, instead meticulously stripping leaves from slender twigs to fish for termites deep within the earth. In still other groups, they fold broad leaves to create temporary sponges, absorbing drinking water from hollows in tree trunks. These are not random instinctual quirks. They are brilliant, localized survival strategies. What begins as a single clever idea by one curious individual can spread through imitation, eventually becoming a core part of a group's unique cultural identity. Furthermore, the social dynamics within their troops are continually shifting. We once believed that chimpanzee societies were ruled exclusively by brute force, with alpha males holding power through terror and aggression. But modern observation reveals a different, evolving reality. In many troops, alpha males lead with astonishing patience and political strategy, securing their position not by biting, but by grooming, sharing meat, and calming disputes among rivals. This shift suggests that their social intelligence is under constant evolutionary pressure, rewarding not just the strongest arms, but the sharpest, most empathetic minds. Today, their environments press upon them with terrifying new demands. The ancient forests are shrinking, sliced apart by human roads and sprawling settlements. As their safe havens fragment, food sources become scarce and unpredictable. In response, some chimpanzees are adapting with breathtaking speed. They have been observed raiding human crops under the cover of darkness, waiting for traffic to pass before crossing roads, and fundamentally altering their feeding patterns to survive on the margins of our world. They are evolving right now, not into humans but into the chimpanzees of the future, shaped by the harsh realities of the present. Just as we must discard the myth of the static chimpanzee, we must also shatter the illusion of our own biological permanence. It is wonderfully comforting to think of ourselves as a finished masterpiece, as though we have proudly stepped off the slow conveyor belt of evolution and arrived at a final, perfected state. We picture ourselves as the ultimate destination, polished and permanent. Yet this idea is nothing more than a flattering mirage. We too are still changing, still adapting, still bending to the invisible pressures of our environment, our diets, and the complex societies we have built around ourselves. The story of human biology is not paused. It is unfolding in real time. One of the clearest, most everyday examples of our ongoing evolution is hidden in a simple glass of milk. For the vast majority of human history, adults could not digest lactose, the complex sugar found in milk. Just like chimpanzees and almost all other mammals, our ancestors completely lost the ability to break it down after childhood weaning. But then, only a few thousand years ago, a mere blink of an eye in evolutionary time, a random genetic mutation appeared in regions where humans had begun to herd cattle. This tiny mutation allowed adults to continue producing lactase, the vital enzyme needed to digest milk, throughout their entire lives. Suddenly, these ancient herders had access to a rich, constant, year-round source of clean hydration, fat, and protein. The survival advantage was so astronomical that the trait swept rapidly through populations in Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Africa. Today, millions of people can effortlessly drink milk because their ancestors' DNA was rewritten by the cultural invention of dairy farming. We see this exact same living evolution in the high, breathless peaks of the world. The thin, freezing air of the Himalayas and the Andes carries dangerously low levels of oxygen, a condition that would cause severe illness or death for most lowland humans over a prolonged period. But populations that have lived in these breathtaking heights for thousands of years, such as the Tibetans and the Quechua, have developed profound genetic adaptations that allow them to thrive. The Tibetans inherited a highly specialized version of a gene from our lost Denisovan cousins, a gene that perfectly regulates how their blood reacts to oxygen deprivation, allowing them to breathe effortlessly where others would gasp for air. In the Andes, isolated populations developed entirely different genetic mutations to solve the exact same problem, proving that evolution is constantly experimenting, finding multiple biological pathways to ensure survival. Even the devastating diseases that haunt our history have left permanent, evolving marks on our genetic code. Across Africa and the Mediterranean, the relentless threat of malaria forced a desperate evolutionary compromise. The sickle cell trait emerged. When a child inherits this gene from both parents, they suffer a terrible, painful disease. But when inherited from only one parent, the trait slightly alters the shape of the red blood cells, granting a powerful, life-saving resistance to the malaria parasite. Evolution is essentially a balancing act of risk and reward, constantly tuning our biology to keep us alive in dangerous landscapes. Our DNA is not a closed book, it is a living manuscript, still being written and revised with every passing generation. As we recognize that our own intelligence and biology are still fluid, we must also widen our gaze beyond the primate family altogether. When we look at the chimpanzee, we see a familiar mirror, and we arrogance assume that high intelligence is a lonely road with humans at the very end. But the spark of thought is not confined to our branch of the tree. It has bloomed in spectacular, alien forms across the entire kingdom of life, reminding us that nature has many different recipes for cleverness. Dip beneath the rolling waves of the ocean, and you will encounter the mind of the dolphin. Their brains are massive, complex, and beautifully folded, humming with abilities that deeply echo our own. Dolphins live in intricate, layered societies. They do not just communicate. They use highly specific, customized whistles to identify themselves, effectively calling each other by name. They coordinate complex, high-speed hunts, herding shimmering schools of fish into tight spirals before taking calculated turns darting through the center to feed. In certain bays, mothers even teach their daughters to break off sea sponges and wear them like protective masks over their snouts, shielding their delicate skin from sharp corals as they forage on the sea floor. This is culture, taught and learned, swimming through the deep blue silence. Step back onto land and observe the slow, majestic walk of the elephant. Behind their gentle, ancient eyes lies a capacity for memory and empathy that rivals any primate. The oldest matriarchs of a herd carry mental maps spanning hundreds of miles, recalling the exact locations of hidden watering holes they have not visited for decades, guiding their families safely through devastating droughts. They communicate across vast distances using low-frequency rumbles that travel through the earth, felt in the sensitive pads of their feet. They have been observed lingering over the bleached bones of their dead, gently caressing the skulls with their versatile trunks in a quiet, solemn ritual that looks heartbreakingly like grief. Their intelligence is not marked by the rapid invention of tools, but by emotional endurance and profound generational memory. Look up into the branches, and you will find the cunning mind of the corvid. Crows and ravens, with brains packed into small feathered skulls, exhibit a terrifyingly brilliant capacity for problem-solving. Lacking hands, they use their sharp beaks to bend stiff wires into perfectly shaped hooks to extract food from impossible crevices. In human cities, they have learned to drop hard walnuts onto busy intersections, waiting patiently on the traffic lights to turn red so they can safely walk onto the asphalt and collect the cracked meat. They recognize individual human faces, remembering acts of kindness or cruelty for years, and passing that knowledge onto their flock. And in the dark, cold depths of the ocean, the octopus presents an intelligence that feels utterly alien. The octopus has no centralized brain like ours. Instead, its intelligence is distributed throughout its body, with millions of neurons residing directly in its 8 arms. An octopus can solve complex puzzles, unscrew the lids of glass jars from the inside, and navigate twisting mazes. It can instantly alter the color, pattern, and physical texture of its skin to vanish flawlessly against a coral reef. Some have even been observed carrying 2 halves of a discarded coconut shell across the sea floor, reassembling them to use as a portable protective armor when danger approaches. These magnificent creatures remind us that human intelligence is merely one flavor in an incredibly diverse banquet of minds. To fully appreciate how our specific brand of intelligence came to be, we must return to the earth, to the dust and stone where our deepest history is buried. For centuries, humans believed that the gap between a wild ape and a walking human was a vast, unbridgeable chasm. But as scientists began to carefully brush the dirt away from ancient fossils, that chasm dissolved into a beautiful, gradual gradient. The lines we drew between ape and human became wonderfully, hopelessly blurred. Consider the breathtaking discovery of Lucy, the fossilized skeleton of Australopithecus afarensis found in Ethiopia. She lived over 3 million years ago. If you were to look at her face, you would see the projecting muzzle and small brain of an ape. She stood barely over 3 feet tall, and her arms hung long, perfectly proportioned for pulling herself up into the branches. But when scientists examined the shape of her pelvis, the angle of her femur, and the arch of her foot, they found something miraculous. Below the waist, Lucy was designed to walk upright across the earth. She was a living bridge, a creature beautifully caught midway between the safety of the canopy and the vast promise of the ground. Further back in time, we found Artie, a member of Ardipithecus ramidus, living 4.5 million years ago. Artie confused and fascinated the scientific world. Her feet possessed a divergent, grasping big toe, unmistakably designed for clinging to the trunks of trees. Yet, the architecture of her upper pelvis indicated that when she descended to the forest floor, she walked on 2 legs. Artie proved that the monumental shift to bipedalism did not happen suddenly on an open grassy plain as we once assumed. It began quietly in the dappled shade of ancient woodlands, as our ancestors cautiously balanced between 2 entirely different worlds. There was no single dramatic leap from ape to human. There was only a slow creeping accumulation of changes, bone by bone, generation by generation. And as those physical forms slowly shifted, so did the way our ancestors interacted with the world around them. About 2.5 million years ago, a small, fragile hominin known as Homo habilis, the handyman, did something that would alter the trajectory of the planet forever. They picked up a smooth river rock, held another in their hand, and struck them together with deliberate, calculated force. They were not just using an object they found. They were fundamentally reshaping matter to suit their imagination. The sharp stone flakes they created were crude, but they were sharper than any tooth or claw. They could slice through thick animal hide, access calorie-dense bone marrow, and carve wood. This was the birth of cumulative culture. While a chimpanzee uses a stick to fish for termites today, exactly as it did 1,000 years ago, human ancestors took their sharp flakes and slowly, over thousands of generations, refined them. The crude flake became a symmetrical hand axe. The hand axe became a spear point. The spear point was lashed to a shaft. Each generation stood on the shoulders of the last, accumulating knowledge and pushing technology forward. This technological awakening was heavily driven by the ruthless hammer of climate change. As the Earth entered a prolonged period of violent ice ages, the climate in Africa swung wildly back and forth. Lush forests dried into harsh deserts, and sprawling lakes evaporated into dust, only to flood again centuries later. For our ancestors caught in these unstable shifting zones, survival required a profound behavioral flexibility. They had to constantly invent new ways to hunt, to forage, and to survive the changing seasons. The intense pressure of a volatile climate forced the human brain to become a supreme engine of adaptability. Meanwhile, the ancestors of chimpanzees remained sheltered within the deep equatorial rainforests. While the edges of their world expanded and contracted, the core of their environment remained relatively stable, buffering them from the most violent swings of the Ice Age climate. Because their world demanded less technological innovation, they perfected the art of living exactly where they were. The swinging pendulum of the Earth's climate acted as the ultimate sculptor, chiseling the ancestors of humans into highly adaptable, tool-wielding wanderers, while allowing the ancestors of chimpanzees to remain the undisputed, powerful masters of the eternal green canopy. The story of human origins, etched into the dust of the earth and the microscopic twisting ladders of our DNA, has always carried a weight far heavier than mere scientific curiosity. Because it speaks to the very core of who we are, where we belong, and what it means to be alive, the narrative of evolution has, tragically, not always been kept within the protective bounds of objective evidence. Throughout history, the beautiful, branching reality of the tree of life has frequently been lifted from the quiet, meticulous realm of the laboratory and violently twisted into a weapon of social division. The simple, innocent misunderstanding of why chimpanzees are not slowly morphing into human beings has at times been manipulated to serve deeply unsettling agendas, building myths that science never authored and nature never intended. In the decades following the initial realization of our deep shared ancestry with the apes, the language used to describe evolution was often sloppy and clouded by human arrogance. Words like primitive, savage, and advanced were casually thrown into the academic lexicon. These words carried dark, insidious echoes of an artificial hierarchy. They made it terrifyingly easy for powerful individuals and empires to imagine that certain groups of living, breathing humans were somehow more evolved than others, or that some populations were lingering closer to our ape-like relatives on that entirely fictional ladder of progress. This profound distortion of biological truth became the foundational bedrock for some of the darkest chapters in recent human history. It was weaponized to brutally justify racism, the sweeping devastation of colonization, the horrors of slavery, and the chilling, calculated cruelty of eugenics. Entire populations, entire cultures, and entire ways of existing were labeled as lesser or subhuman by those who falsely claimed the absolute authority of science. They looked at the beautiful, diverse adaptations of the human family and purposefully misread them as a ranking system, a ledger of biological superiority that simply does not and has never existed in the natural world. The undeniable scientific truth is that every single human being walking the face of the earth today belongs to the exact same unbroken species. We all share the exact same profound cognitive capacities, the same emotional depths, and the same magnificent ancient chain of ancestry that stretches all the way back to those first cautious, upright footsteps in the African dust. The microscopic genetic variations that exist between different human populations today are vanishingly small, utterly dwarfed by the overwhelming, monumental biological similarities we all carry within ourselves. There is absolutely no scientific basis, no hidden genetic metric, for ranking one group of humans as higher or lower, or closer to or farther from our shared evolutionary origins. Evolution simply does not play favorites. It is not a race to a predetermined finish line, and it certainly does not leave some populations behind while crowning others as the victors. Because of this dark, heavy history of misuse, modern scientists have learned the absolute critical importance of clarity. The language we use to describe the story of life must be chosen with immense, delicate care. When we casually speak of humans as the pinnacle of creation, we risk feeding the very myths that have caused so much harm. We must tell this story with precision and with profound humility, recognizing that knowledge is a powerful tool, one that can open the mind to endless wonder, but also one that can cause deep wounds if left unchecked by morality and truth. And as we sweep away the dangerous myths of human hierarchy, our gaze naturally turns back toward the deep forests, to the cousins who still reside there. We must realize that the story of the chimpanzee is not safely locked away in the distant past, nor is it guaranteed a place in the distant future. Their evolutionary journey is unfolding right now, in this exact moment, but it is being shaped by forces that are vastly different from the slow, natural climatic shifts that sculpted our shared ancestors. Today, the world around the chimpanzee presses in on them with sudden, overwhelming violence, and these new challenges are almost entirely born from the hands of humanity. Across the vast, humid expanse of equatorial Africa, where chimpanzees have woven their leafy nests for millions of years, the ancient, unbroken canopy is being shattered. Where the air once carried only the sounds of bird calls, falling rain, and the echoing pant-hoots of primate troops, it now hums with the mechanical roar of chainsaws and diesel engines. wide, dusty roads are slicing ruthlessly through the heart of the wilderness. Sprawling agricultural settlements and vast logging operations are clearing away ancient trees that have stood as silent sentinels for centuries. Every single year, thousands upon thousands of hectares of prime, life-sustaining rainforests simply vanish from the earth, leaving behind only isolated, shrinking islands of green. For a highly intelligent, intensely social species that relies on vast, unbroken territories to forage for seasonal fruits and maintain complex community boundaries, this rapid fragmentation is utterly devastating. It means that once connected troops are now cut off from one another by impassable seas of asphalt and farmland. As these populations become isolated, their genetic diversity, the very raw material that evolution requires to build resilience against disease and changing conditions, begins to shrink. The resources within these fragmented islands dwindle, forcing troops into desperate, violent conflicts over remaining food or pushing them closer to the perilous edges of human settlements. But the loss of the canopy is not the only shadow looming over their survival. In many regions, the tragedy deepens with the relentless pressure of hunting. Chimpanzees are frequently killed for the commercial bushmeat trade, a practice driven by complex socioeconomic pressures, but one that takes an irreplaceable toll on a slow-reproducing species. When an adult is killed, the tragedy echoes through the entire troop. And when a mother is taken, her clinging infant is often pulled from her body, destined to be sold into the bleak, lonely world of the illegal pet trade. The trauma of this loss is not merely physical, it is cultural and emotional. Every elder chimpanzee that falls to a snare or a bullet takes with them a vast, irreplaceable library of forest knowledge, the memory of where to find water during a brutal drought, or how to properly wield a stone hammer. As these pressures mount, a haunting question hangs in the humid air: how will the chimpanzee adapt? Evolution is remarkably resilient, and chimps are highly intelligent problem solvers. Some troops are already learning to navigate this new human-dominated reality, cautiously raiding crops under the cover of darkness and passing these new survival strategies down to their young. But biological adaptation has hard limits. Because chimps reproduce so slowly, requiring years to raise a single infant, they simply cannot rebound from population crashes fast enough to outpace the roar of the bulldozers. Their future is incredibly fragile, and for the first time in their millions of years of existence, their survival depends entirely on the mercy and the choices of another species. This stark vulnerability stands in breathtaking contrast to the current evolutionary trajectory of humanity. While the chimpanzees struggle to simply exist within a rapidly shrinking natural world, humans have stepped over a threshold that no other organism in the history of the planet has ever crossed. We are no longer waiting for the slow, random, and blind mutations of natural selection to sculpt our biology over thousands of generations. For the very first time in the 4 billion-year saga of life on Earth, a species has gained the astonishing, godlike power to peer directly into its own source code and to consciously, deliberately rewrite it. The human genome, a vast and silent library of biological information that was once utterly inaccessible, can now be read, sequenced, and mapped in a matter of hours. And with the invention of revolutionary molecular tools like CRISPR, we have moved beyond merely reading the code. We have become the editors. Scientists now possess molecular scissors capable of seeking out specific microscopic sequences of DNA, snipping them out, and replacing them with customized instructions. What began as a cautious medical endeavor to silence rare, devastating genetic diseases has suddenly opened the door to an era of self-directed evolution. We are standing on the precipice of a future where humans might actively select the genetic traits of their offspring before birth. The ability to enhance immunity, increase physical endurance, or even tweak the biological foundations of memory and intelligence is shifting rapidly from the realm of science fiction into the quiet, brightly lit laboratories of the present. We are bypassing the patient, trial-and-error methodology of nature. But this incredible power brings with it an agonizing moral weight. If we begin to aggressively alter our own fundamental biology, editing out our flaws and engineering enhancements, at what point do we cease to be the human beings that walked out of Africa and become something entirely new, authored by our own hands? And yet, genetic engineering is only a fraction of the story. Our evolution is no longer strictly bound to the flesh. We have birthed a completely different kind of evolutionary force, one not coded in carbon and DNA, but in silicon and mathematics, artificial intelligence. AI is growing and evolving at a speed that makes biological evolution look like a frozen glacier. It is learning from oceans of human data, solving incredibly complex puzzles in seconds, and beginning to weave itself seamlessly into the daily cognitive fabric of our lives. We are offloading our memories to digital clouds, our navigation to satellites, and our decision-making to invisible algorithms. In a very real sense, and human culture and human technology have become a unified, rapidly accelerating evolutionary vehicle. A new idea, a new cultural shift, or a new technological breakthrough can now ripple across the entire globe in a matter of hours, fundamentally changing how billions of people interact, reproduce, and survive. The timescale of human change, which was once measured in tedious millennia, has been violently compressed into decades. As we sprint headlong into this dizzying, self-authored future, a future of gene editing and artificial minds, the contrast with our cousins in the forest becomes almost overwhelming to contemplate. And yet, if we step away from the glowing screens and the sterile laboratories, and we look back one final time into the deep, shadowed greenery of the jungle, we find that the mirror they hold up to us has not lost its power. In fact, in an increasingly digital and artificial world, the raw biological reflection of the chimpanzees is more vital and more deeply grounding than ever before. To watch a troop of chimpanzees is to see the raw, unfiltered emotional foundation upon which all of human civilization is built. When you watch a mother chimpanzee gently, infinitely patiently stroke the back of her sleeping infant, rocking it in a cradle of woven branches as the evening wind rustles the leaves, you are looking at the ancient, unadulterated roots of love. When you see young chimps chasing each other through a clearing, tackling, tumbling, and letting out breathless, rhythmic pants that sound undeniably like human laughter, you are witnessing the deep evolutionary purpose of play, the very same instinct that drives our own children to run and shriek on playgrounds of plastic and steel. Their world is a mirror of our own raw social dynamics. They experience profound grief, sitting in hushed, stunned silence around the body of a fallen companion. They understand the complex currency of friendship, spending hours meticulously grooming one another, tracing fingers through dark fur to say, in the silent language of touch, that they are allies. But the mirror reflects our darker shadows too. They form political coalitions, they betray one another for social standing, and they patrol their borders with a cold, calculated violence that chills the blood, reminding us that the capacity for war and cruelty was not invented in modern armories, but was carried out of the deep past. They are stripped bare of our cities, our laws, and our technology, yet they pulse with the exact same emotional colors that paint the human heart. To know that we share 98.8% of our DNA with these magnificent, complex creatures is to finally surrender the illusion that we are somehow separate from nature, or that we were dropped onto this planet from a completely different realm. We are an ape that learned to speak, an ape that learned to tame the fire, an ape that built ships to touch the cold, silent dust of the moon. But beneath the layers of our towering intellect, we are still bound to the rhythms of the earth, and we are still inextricably kin to the creatures who watch us from the trees. Therefore, the ultimate answer to the question that has puzzled us for generations, why aren't chimpanzees turning into humans, is beautiful in its profound simplicity. They are not turning into us because they were never meant to. They are a wildly successful, breathtakingly beautiful answer to the question of how to live in harmony with the ancient forests of the earth. They are not our failed past. They are our vibrant, living cousins, traveling beside us on a different branch of the exact same magnificent tree of life. So as the deep velvet darkness of the night finally wraps around us, let us find a deep, resonant comfort in this shared story. As we lie in our beds, surrounded by the quiet hum of electricity and the safety of walls, we can close our eyes and know that far away, under the very same blanket of stars, our closest relatives are curling up in their woven nests, high in the canopy, finding rest in the rhythms of the wild. We are all survivors. We are all children of the same ancient, shifting earth, simply dreaming different dreams. Thank you, deeply and truly, for drifting through these quiet, winding paths of science and history with me tonight. If this journey has brought you a sense of peace, and if you enjoy letting your mind wander through the wonders of the universe without any pressure to stay awake, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. It breathes life into this channel and helps guide other restless minds toward a place of calm and curiosity. I would absolutely love to hear from you down in the comments. Where in this wide, beautiful world are you resting your head tonight? What hour is it outside your window? There is something incredibly magical about knowing that these quiet stories are traveling across oceans and time zones, connecting us all in a shared moment of wonder and sleep. Take one last, slow, deep breath in. Let the long, heavy day fade away completely. Let your muscles soften, let your mind float, and rest well, my friends. Until the next time we wander together, sleep peacefully, and good night.